One of the much anticipated pre-New Year's Day and New Year's Eve bowl matchups is in Orlando, Florida, with the Big 12 and the ACC getting together. North Carolina, 11-2, made it to the ACC championship game. Of course, Baylor, figured to be a college football playoff contender, fell in the late going due to injuries, 9-3. We bring in a Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to help us sort through this one. And when I say sort through it, Mike, it starts with the Baylor offense, because this isn't the Baylor Bears offense we're used to seeing, minus quarterback, running back, wide receiver, all top performers at their positions.
Yeah, so it started out with Seth Russell, and he was having a phenomenal year. He threw for over 2,000 yards and 29 touchdowns to only 6 interceptions, but he broke a bone in his neck during the victory over Iowa State late in October, and he ended up missing the last 5 games. So who does Baylor turn to? Well, they turn to Jarrett Stidham. And they're hoping that Jarrett Stidham can step in, and he stepped in and played quite well, threw for 1,200 yards in his time playing quarterback for Baylor. He came in late in the season, played bits and pieces of most of the first 8 or 9 games, just because Baylor was blowing teams out. Well, we got an extended look at him starting after Iowa State. They went on the road. They played Kansas State, and he played quite well in his first appearance, 23 of 33 for 419 yards and 3 touchdowns. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, Baylor's missing their starting quarterback. No problem. Jarrett Stidham can step right in, until he got hurt, and he missed the last 2 games of the season. And they went with Chris Johnson. Well, Jarrett Stidham has been ruled out of the bowl game, so it will be Chris Johnson's job. And Baylor sputtered quite a bit with him at quarterback. He had 3 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions in his 2 games that he played in late in the season, and threw for 220 yards. So Chris Johnson's going to have to take a step up in the quality of his play if Baylor wants to have a chance to win the bowl game. And it doesn't get any easier for Baylor, because at running back they lose Shock Linwood, a 1,300-yard rusher. He's out for the bowl game, as well as their NFL-bound starting wide receiver, Corey Coleman, who had 1,300 yards receiving and 20 touchdown catches this season. So it's been tough sledding for Baylor, and they're going to have to find some new contributors and some different guys to step up at the bowl game if they want a chance to beat a very good North Carolina team.
Yeah, Mike, Jarrett Stidham, not your typical backup. This kid came in as a 5-star freshman, so inexperienced, but as you mentioned, because of all the blowouts, he was able to get garbage time reps and appeared ready for the job. Maybe a step down from Russell, but still capable of getting this team possibly to a Big 12 championship. 12 touchdowns, 2 picks. In place of Shock Linwood, they got a couple backs in sophomore Johnny Jefferson, who rang up Texas for $158 in the season finale, ran for 705 touchdowns, and freshman Terrence Williams, his stats might be a little bit deceiving in the yards per carry, et cetera, because he played mostly, again, against the Lamars of the world in Baylor's early season schedule. Corey Coleman would have most likely, Mike, broken the Big 12 receptions, touchdown receptions record. He had 20 after like 8 games, and then didn't catch one the last 4 games because of the quarterback situation, when they couldn't really throw the ball downfield, and still finished, again, just second to Michael Crabtree in all-time touchdown receptions for a single season. Corey Coleman, or Katie Cannon, actually, the number 2 receiver, is a kid that really ripped up Michigan State in the Cotton Bowl last year. He caught 46 and 6 touchdowns, and actually this kid, Jay Lee, 20 yards per reception, also a downfield threat. So they have some guys to go to, but not the over-the-top talent of a Corey Coleman. I think it's worthy of note that we don't know a whole lot about Johnson. We could look at the numbers. He played against good teams, but he came in against Oklahoma State in the second half after the Stidham injury. He played really well in that game. Then after that, tough to evaluate. TCU, that was in a monsoon. They really couldn't throw the ball, couldn't do much on offense. Then the last game against Texas, he got hurt after 4 possessions, wasn't doing much with the football there, but really didn't have a chance to generate much offense in that one. So that's the deal with Baylor on offense. But North Carolina, it's Marquise Williams. So that we know it's been a stable situation there in Chapel Hill for quite some time with the dual threat quarterback in place.
Okay, yeah, so Marquise Williams, he throws for 2,800 yards this year, completes 60% of his passes, 21 touchdowns to only 9 interceptions. And unlike Baylor, North Carolina has no issues on offense. Their entire squad seems to be healthy. Elijah Hood, I mean, he's had a fantastic season, had over 200 carries on the year for 1,300 yards and 17 touchdown runs. Marquise Williams also carried a bit of the load, rushing the football as well. 870 yards rushing and 11 touchdowns in his own right. So North Carolina has been able to run the ball an extremely effective clip, and that's really opened up the passing game where they have all the way down to Ryan Switzer. Of course, Ryan Switzer, All-American kick returner, and I think that Switzer's impact in the passing game has improved drastically over the last couple seasons because he's been targeted a lot more often, especially this season for North Carolina. And I think that Ryan Switzer's impact on the offensive side of the football, as well as the return game, could be a key to the game for the Tar Heels.
You know, my one concern for North Carolina is that even though Marquise Williams, Mike, is a veteran, his two worst performances of the year came in the opener, where he turned the ball over 3 times, 2 red zone interceptions, 1 in the end zone. They lose to a bad South Carolina team. And then the last game of the season against Clemson, even though they stayed in the game, came within an onside kick or a penalty of possibly pulling that one out, he was like 13 for 33 against Clemson. So against the better defenses, Marquise Williams, despite the glossy stats overall against this Baylor defense, which Baylor's not known for defense, but if you look at the front defensive line for Baylor, it is loaded.
Yeah, Baylor's defense, you know, for all of the trials and tribulations that the Big 12 has received for their defense across the board, Baylor does have an extremely effective front seven. And this is the type of thing that you worry about with North Carolina, like you said, because Marquise Williams had 3 crucial turnovers in the opener against South Carolina that they lose. He didn't perform quite as well as you would have hoped in the Clemson game. Came up with some big throws in some crucial situations, but 13 for 33 is not nearly as effective as we're used to seeing for Williams. So I think what's going to have to happen in the bowl game, in the Russell Athletic Bowl against Baylor, they're going to have to establish a run game early. If they can get Elijah Hood going, it'll open up the passing game. And against this front seven, it'll be a tough task, but Elijah Hood has had such great success this season running the ball that if North Carolina can get him established early and often, they're going to be able to open up the passing game, later in the game when it's crunch time. And Marquise Williams has played well overall this season when it's mattered the most.
Mike, we alluded to this Baylor schedule off the top, and once they dove into the Big 12 and got into November, it ramped up quite a bit. But much of this production against the Lamars and Rices of the world. But Sean Oakman, 14.5 tackles for loss. Andrew Billings was, I believe, the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, 15.5 tackles for loss and 5 sacks. Jamal Palmer, double-digit tackles for loss at 13.5. And Xavier Howard, a kid that picked off 5 passes in the secondary. So the Baylor defense in place of the offense this year late in the season picked up the slack to a certain extent, although they dropped the 3 ball games. What I like about North Carolina's offense and trying to deal with that Baylor defense, if they can protect Williams, is you mentioned Ryan Switzer with 51 catches, but man, they spread the ball all over the field with the other 3 guys, including Quinshad Davis, who's the all-time receptions leader there at North Carolina.
Yeah, they throw the ball around quite a bit. Like you said, all of the receivers for North Carolina seem to have some level of production. Mac Hollins over 700 yards, Switzer over 600 yards, Quinshad Davis, as you alluded to, over 570 yards receiving this season. And overall, North Carolina has 6 guys with 200 yards or more receiving this year. So Marquise Williams is not afraid to spread the ball around. I think that's going to keep Baylor's defense on their toes because I think, there are the go-to guys. Mac Hollins is a guy they've targeted the most this season, but there's Switzer underneath. You got Quinshad Davis on the outside. Bug Howard has emerged as a big-time target. So there's no shortage of weapons for North Carolina in this bowl game.
I don't know, Mike, if Gene Chizik is this good, but the numbers would bear him out, at least as defensive coordinator this go-around. They were atrocious on defense last year. They weren't great this year, but at least made a couple stops per game, weren't horrible, didn't blow coverages, blow tackles, missed assignments all over the place to allow the offense to win the game at least.
Yeah, I mean, they were still a top 80 defense, and for North Carolina, that's a huge jump from last season when they were statistically one of the worst defenses in college football. The lack of big plays this season has been huge because North Carolina, it's kind of been a bend but don't break mentality, which has been huge for the Tar Heels. They've been able to keep a lot of big plays in front of them, which they could not do a year ago. I mean, every time I turned on North Carolina game, it seemed like they were giving up a back-breaking crucial play late that ended up deciding the ball game. And this year, with the Gene Chizik defense, they haven't had that issue. They've been keeping all the big plays in front of them. They've been keeping offenses for the most part at bay. And even Clemson in the ACC championship game, I mean, yes, Clemson's going to get their yards and their touchdowns, but the defense did keep the Tar Heels in it, even when the offense was sputtering a little bit there in the second half. So I think it's huge for North Carolina this year that they were able to establish some sort of defensive identity, which was absent a year ago.
All right, Mike, what do you think about this one? Third string quarterback, no shock Linwood, Corey Coleman. Baylor also without its starting senior right tackle, going up against a North Carolina team that won 11 straight games.
Yeah, Baylor's defense, they'll try to keep them in it. The issue they're going to have is on the offensive side of the football, like you alluded to. I mean, sure, we don't know a ton about Chris Johnson, but I think the issue is going to be in the run game. I mean, Shock Linwood, that's a gigantic loss. And the go-to guy, Chris Coleman, is no longer there on the outside, or Corey Coleman, excuse me, is no longer there on the outside at receiver. So, while the quarterback play could actually be pretty good in the bowl game, because we're not really sure what we got overall, I think that North Carolina, we know what we got with them. Everybody's healthy. They have a proven identity on offense and defense. I think the defense makes enough plays to slow down Baylor, even if Baylor's offense is clicking. And more importantly, I think North Carolina makes more than enough plays on the offensive side of the football to win the football game. Ryan Switzer, I think, is a guy you're going to have to watch. Kick return game is huge. I think if it's a close game late, any sort of play in special teams will be gigantic. We saw it in the ACC championship game, how big of a call the special teams was late in the game with the onside kick that ended up not being called off because of the flag for the offsides penalty. I mean, special teams is a huge part of any college football game, but especially a bowl game where it's supposed to be tightly contested. And, North Carolina has a game-breaking return man in Ryan Switzer, and I think he could be the difference in the game if it's close late. So I'm going to take the Tar Heels because of all the uncertainty for Baylor's offense.
All right, Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC. And if you love college football, or if you love the ACC football, basketball especially, check out Inside the ACC. That's where I go to keep up with the Atlantic Coast Conference. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
All right, thanks, Mark.